Hello Chatterbots, welcome back to another episode of Chat About That. I'm Bella.
And I'm Alec.
And in this episode, we're going to be chatting about The Mandalorian Season 3. So before we chat about Season 3, I want to give a little bit of a recap of the first two seasons because I've never actually talked about The Mandalorian on the podcast before, but I've mentioned many times how much I love the show. And I've talked a little bit about it, but never in full detail. So we're just going to do a really quick recap of the first two seasons, just for those of you who are listening who might not know anything about it. But if you haven't seen it, please watch it. It's amazing. It's literally our favorite show. We watch it we watch it the second the show comes out. So The Mandalorian in the universe, it's, for those who don't know, it's a Star Wars show. It takes place in the Star Wars universe. And it actually takes place 5 years after the Battle of Endor. So that would be Return of the Jedi? Yeah, so Return of the Jedi was episode 6 in the original trilogy. So it takes place 5 years after that, so no Rey, no Kylo Ren, none of those characters are in it. They probably would have been maybe babies at the time, if they were even born. It takes place 5 years after the Battle of Endor, which is what ended, the Empire and Darth Vader and all of that. So it focuses on Din Djarin, aka the Mandalorian, aka Mando, so we'll call him Din, Mando, that's what they call him. And he's one of the best bounty hunters in the galaxy at this point, and he's also a Mandalorian. And so the first season focuses on the fact that he takes this job from this character named Grief Karga. Yeah. Actually met the actor who plays him. So he takes this job to get this bounty because he's a bounty hunter and you got new jobs, collecting people or bounties as they call them. And so there's this bounty that's really highly sought after and nobody can go get it because it's really hard to get and everything. And it turns out that bounty is Baby Yoda, aka Grogu. So kind of just focuses on him doing various jobs, trying to run away from people who are trying to get Baby Yoda, because this character named Moff Gideon is the one who sought out to get Grogu back from wherever he was hiding, and he Mando meets all these other characters throughout the season, such as Pele, who's a she's a mechanic on Tatooine. She's such a cool character. Grief Karga, as we mentioned, and a bunch of other people, and basically at the end you learn, like I said, Moff Gideon was trying to get him. Actually, we also met Moff Gideon at Awesome Con too. He was really cool. And you just learn about, Mando and a little bit of the history of him. And so he became a Mandalorian after his family was murdered in a droid attack during the Clone Wars, I assume it would have been.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, so it was probably during the Clone Wars, and he was founded by the Mandalorians because the Mandalorians came in and saved his town, but his family was unfortunately killed, and so he became a foundling, which is basically a Mandalorian that wasn't born into the Mandalorian culture, but someone that was found and became a Mandalorian through being rescued or saved or whatever by the Mandalorians. And his religion, they don't take off their helmets and stuff, which we'll get into. That comes into play in more of season 2. So that's kind of the gist of the first season. Now I'm missing a lot of stuff, but we do want to focus more on season 3.
So season 2, it focuses on Mando trying to find a Jedi who can train Grogu, because Mando, he's I know nothing about this Force stuff. I need somebody to help me out with her. So right at the beginning, he encounters more Mandalorians, and he's like, oh great, you guys can help me. Then they take off their helmets, and he's like, you're not Mandalorian. And they're like, yeah, we are. And then that comes into the helmet thing where they didn't follow the same creed that he did. For him, it was much more serious religious aspect of keeping the helmet on.
And wasn't keeping the helmet kind of the original way of the Mandalore, where it was the way was not showing your face and stuff, so it's kind of a more of an ancient version of the Mandalorian culture,
then they became looked at, as not apostates, but more cultish, kind of extremists, during the Mandalorian civil wars and all that, and then they were exiled to the moon. So
and so those Mandalorians that he came across in season 2, one of them is Bo-Katan, who, if you've seen the Clone Wars, Bo-Katan is really pretty prominent in that series. And her family was like one of the rulers of Mandalore, right? Yeah. So Bo-Katan's she's a very big character in the Clone Wars, and she becomes very prominent in season 3, as we'll get into. But she's like one of the Mandalorians that he runs into who don't wear their helmets all the time, and he's like shook that like there's people out there, and she's like, oh god, you're one of those people. So like there's a lot of that we'll come into later.
So eventually he gets word of a Jedi who happens to be Ahsoka Tano, so again another huge character from the Clone Wars, and she's off doing her own thing. This is after she split from the Jedi training order and all of that, and so she begins basically communicating with Grogu through the Force, and at one point she refers to him as a Grogu, and Mando's like, what? And she's like, oh yeah, he has a name. And so it's really cool, just her kind of, exploring him, and, like, use of the Force, and trains him some things, like how to use, like, the silver balls.
Basically what happens with Ahsoka is that, so in the Clone Wars, like Malik mentioned, Ahsoka Tano was actually Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, which, for those of you who didn't watch the Clone Wars, you're like, what? Why did Anakin have a Padawan? And anyway, so Clone Wars is like I mentioned earlier, is an animated series, and Ahsoka Tano is very prominent in that show. She's like one of the main characters. She's Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, so she's being trained under Anakin. And basically what happens in that show is that at some point, she kind of moves away from the Jedi because she gets like framed for something, and they realize after the fact, okay, it wasn't you, and we'll let you back in, become a Jedi, because they like strip her of like her Jedi status. And at that point she's like, no, like I don't want to be a Jedi with you because like you didn't believe me and all this. So in The Mandalorian, when they meet Ahsoka, she's been by herself. The Jedi at this point are really not prominent. They're not really being persecuted anymore as much as they were like in the Obi-Wan series, or like even in the original trilogy, but they're very like not like, people don't really know like where they are, and they're kind of still in hiding in a sense. So Ahsoka decides she's not going to train Grogu because she doesn't want to train more Jedi, and she basically doesn't want to like risk anybody that she trains becoming bad and going to the path of the Sith, because her master turned into Darth Vader. So there's a lot of like issues there, and she's just like, I'm not the person to train him, you need to find somebody else. And so she tells them about this like magical place where Grogu can sit and like basically reach out with the Force and like try to get another Jedi to come and find him. So that's kind of what happens with Ahsoka.
Yeah, so he's up there, he's meditating at this temple, and he's in the zone, and then, well, Mando's ship gets blown up, and then all these folks show up, and lo and behold, Boba Fett shows up, and he's like, you have my armor, I want it back. And Mando's like, what are you talking about? And so that was from an earlier episode. Long story short, Mando went to this town in the desert, and the sheriff at the town was wearing armor that happened to be Boba Fett's armor, and a series of events, Mando was like, I'll help you out, but you got to return that armor because that's Mandalorian armor. You just can't be walking around with that. And Boba Fett caught wind of it, and that's how Boba Fett eventually found Mando and them on this planet. And then the other folks show up again. They blow up Mando's ship, and then Boba Fett and Mando, and then also Fennec Shand.
So Fennec Shand was a character in the first season that Mando was supposed to go and kill, and she ends up getting killed, but we find out later in the Book of Boba Fett, which is a show that happened in between season 2 and season 3 of The Mandalorian, which we'll talk about a little bit. Fennec actually wasn't killed, and Boba Fett stumbled upon her in the desert, and he like saves her and stuff. So Bo-Katan is sort of like not Bo-Katan. Fennec Shand is in debt basically to Boba Fett because he saved her. So they basically go and they find Mando, like Malik said, and they're like, give us your armor back, but then they decide to help Mando because something terrible happens to Baby Yoda.
Yep, he does end up getting kidnapped, and so they're like, enemy of our enemies are our friends, so we gotta help this guy out. And then Boba Fett was also kind of like, okay, Mando, you gave me back the armor, I'll do you a favor as well.
So they Boba Fett, Mando, and Fennec all team up with also Bo-Katan and her people and a couple other folks. They find out where Baby Yoda is being held, and in the process of like trying to find out where Baby Yoda is, because he's on Moff Gideon's ship, but it's like disguised and stuff, like weird technology that they can't like figure out how to find it. And basically they go to this planet, and in the process of trying to find out like where the coordinates are, Mando has to take off his helmet, which is like big no no, and he takes off in front of other people, and it's like this big deal. So they basically end up getting the coordinates, finding out where Baby Yoda is, big team up with everybody, and you also find out that Moff Gideon is in possession of the dark saber, which is basically like this ancient Mandalorian like weapon that whoever holds a dark saber is the ruler of Mandalore, and Bo-Katan had previously had the dark saber, so she's really mad, and she's like, I'll help you basically find Moff Gideon because she knows he has it and all that. So in this fight, Din becomes in possession of the darksaber, and Bo-Katan's like pissed because she's like, I had one condition coming here, I would get the darksaber, and you like betrayed me. And he didn't really realize in the process of like defeating Moff Gideon that he would become in possession of it. So he's like, I don't want this, like take it. And she says you have to win it in combat. So that's why he won it against Moff Gideon, is because he won it in this combat. They rescue Baby Yoda, and Moff Gideon is like in their possession at this point. They're gonna like send him to like be tried for his crimes or whatever. In the process of this, Luke Skywalker shows up because he's the one that Baby Yoda like reached out to with the Force. And so at the end, Luke Skywalker, who's actually played by Mark Hamill and another actor that they like use technology to like make Mark Hamill look younger, but they put his like face on the body of this other actor. It's very, very cool. They have behind the scenes on Disney Plus of like how they made this show, and it's really cool how they did the technology. But Mark Hamill was actually on set with the other actor as well. And so Mando again removes his helmet in front of everyone, shows Baby Yoda his face, and says like, "I'll, you know, come find you when you're done training." And so Luke takes Baby Yoda off to be trained. Which brings us to the Book of Boba Fett. I know this is a lot of background, but it's important. So on the Book of Boba Fett, there's a couple of episodes that focus on Baby Yoda and Mando. And so one of the plots is that Baby Yoda is training on this planet with Luke, and Ahsoka's there as well. And basically Luke gives him a choice because Mando comes to him and delivers like this little like Beskar, which is like the medal of the Mandalorians. He delivers this little Beskar like chain mail to him, and Luke says you can either take the chain mail gift and go back to Mando and abandon your training, or you can stay here, take a lightsaber, and continue your training as a Jedi. And before that happens, Mando finds the armorer, who is a very prominent character in the first season, and she is basically the leader of like his Mandalorian like group. And she's really important in season 3, but he finds her and a couple others because the planet that they were on in the first season gets like destroyed or whatever. And so all of them are kind of just like wandering around. They don't really have like a place. So he finds where they are, and he shows them that he has the darksaber, and then he lets it slip to them that he took his helmet off. And they're like, well, you're not a Mandalorian anymore. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, you took your helmet off for other people. You disobeyed the creed. You're not Mandalorian. The only way to become a Mandalorian again is to go bathe in the living waters of Mandalore, which is on their home planet that was like destroyed during the Clone Wars. And she's like, well, they're destroyed. You can't go there, so you're not a Mandalorian. That's the only way. And he's like, bullshit, because he's going to go find it. Anyway, so that happens. He ends up finding Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda like comes to him, and it's basically implied that he left training with Luke. He abandoned his training, and he finds Mando. So season 3 is all about the finding of these, basically the home world. They go find the home world of Mandalore so that he can become a Mandalorian once more, and they can restore their place as Mandalorian. So that brings us to Mandalorian season 3. So basically it starts off where Mando is traveling to where the armorer and a bunch of other Mandalorians, like all the people that were in his covert, which is like their community, they all are, and he's like, hey, I want to go and find Mandalore. I want to basically go into the living waters, become a Mandalorian again. And the armorer, again, who's like the leader of all of them, basically like lets it slip to him that, yeah, the waters are probably still there, but there's kind of like a slim chance. But she said, yeah, if you can go and bathe in the waters, then like you can become a Mandalorian again. And he's like, I'll do it. But then he goes back to the planet where Greef Karga is, and he's like kind of reestablished the planet because that's where like Mando was living with the Mandalorians before.
Yeah, he ends up pissing off some pirates in the town and really pisses him off. Takes a schwack at the leader, and several of his cronies die. And then they end up bringing basically their whole pirate fleet, which is impressive because some of the ships they had were kind of ridiculous as far as pirates go, in my opinion. But anyway, so the pirates come back. They end up really messing up the whole town. Again, everything for the people and where the Mandalorians used to live and everything. And then Bo-Katan and them show up and they're like, we can't let these guys keep getting away with this, basically. So that also helps tie into why Bo-Katan ends up teaming up with Mando.
Yeah, so Mando goes to Bo-Katan's like homeworld, and he's like, hey, there's like these pirates, and also I'm going to like the Living Waters, and I'm gonna restore Mandalore. And she's like, bullshit, they're like not a thing anymore, like the whole planet is blown up, like you're a dumbass. And she's basically at this point just pissed off because she doesn't have the Darksaber. She kind of lost her status with the people that she was with before. And she's just really, like, pissed. And she's, still mad that Mando has the Darksaber when she basically was like, I want the Darksaber. And he doesn't want it at all. And so he's like, well, screw you. I'm just going to go to the planet anyway. So he goes to Mandalore. And he uses, like, a droid to, like, go and, like, make sure that the planet is still, like, viable. Because, like, weren't there, like, rumors that the planet, like, that it was inhabitable because of the air or something?
Yeah, there was, like, poison gas being released because of it being so badly destroyed.
Yeah, so he basically proves that you can live there. It's not poisonous. And he goes into, like, the mines, and there's some weird, like, droid spider creature.
That thing was weird, and they never explained it.
Yeah, so there's some weird creature that's, like, in the mines, basically, like, right before you get into, like, where the Living Waters are, because you, like, travel down. And he gets kidnapped or captured by this creature that they show all these bones of all these Mandalorians. Basically, this creature's, like, been eating and killing any Mandalorians that come there. And so he's like, Baby Yoda, like, because Baby Yoda's in his little pod. He's like, go find Bo-Katan, tell her to come here and, like, save me. So he, like, goes and flies the ship to Bo-Katan, and Bo-Katan sees the ship, and she's like, oh my god, I need to, like, blast this guy out of the sky. I'm sick of him. Find out it's Baby Yoda, and he communicates with her that Mando is on the planet, and then Bo-Katan goes and saves him.
Yeah, they actually find the Living Waters. Again, Bo-Katan is just as surprised as Mando is that the air is breathable, it's still sort of habitable, and that there's all these ruins that are, they're in ruins, but they're pretty untouched under the surface. Anyway, they travel all the way to the waters. They find them. There's, like, the staircase going in. It's this cavern. It's really beautiful. And Mando takes a step right in, and then he just eats shit and completely disappears in this water. And Bo-Katan's like, what is going on?
They never really explain what happened. So there's, like, some theories online that his armor was so heavy that he just sunk to the bottom of the water, or he fell in some, like, hole or something. But basically, Bo-Katan is like, oh shit. And Baby Yoda is, like, freaking out. And so she goes into the water and rescues him because she has, like, a jetpack or whatever. I mean, he's a jetpack too, but he's kind of dumb.
He's dumb, yeah.
I love Mando, but some of the things that he does,
just like, dude.
He's a himbo. And if you don't know what a himbo is, it's really, like, a really nice, dumb, beefy guy. So, like, if you've ever seen the Ghostbusters movie with... This is the best example I have. The Ghostbusters movie with all the women. The female Ghostbusters movie. Chris Hemsworth plays this character that's, like, the dumbest dude ever. He's so dumb, but he's really nice, and he's really hot. So, like, a really nice, dumb, hot dude that's, like, beefy. That's what a himbo is. Anyway, Mando is basically, like, a himbo. He's a smart person, but sometimes some of the shit he does, I'm like, dude.
Yeah.
Like unaware of some things. Anyway, so Bo-Katan, like, goes into the water, saves him, and she sees a mythosaur in the water. And if you don't know what the mythosaur is basically, like, the creature of Mandalore, right? And it's like the most well-respected animal, and it's this mythological creature, basically, because they used to be, like, the mythosaur used to be, like, real.
Yep.
And at this point, people think that they're all dead. They've been gone for many years. They're basically this mythological being that the Mandalorians, like, kind of worship, in a sense. And a lot of their armor and a lot of their sigils are the mythosaur. And so Bo-Katan sees the mythosaur in the water, and she's like, something's, like, she kind of feels that, like, it's a sign of, like, her
her faith is kind of getting restored.
Yeah, her faith in the Mandalorians have been sort of restored. She kind of feels like maybe by seeing this creature, she's chosen or something. So it's kind of awakened something in her. And so she kind of says something to Mando. She's like, did you see anything down there? And he's like, no, I was like, knocked the fuck out. So so they leave Mandalore, and Bo-Katan is like, you didn't see anything down there? And he's like, nah. And she's like, okay. So they go back to her home planet to kind of like regroup, and all the pirates basically have found them and have blown up her house, and they're forced to like leave and go back to like the original like covert where the armor and all them were.
Yep.
So then we kind of get into something that was very interesting, but it didn't make any sense until the last episode. So we're going to try to like cover this a little bit quickly. But basically there is a doctor from the first season who was the person that was hired by Moff Gideon to experiment on Grogu. And I think at this point it's kind of implied that Moff Gideon took Grogu to basically get like the Jedi like essence out of him. Is that like what they don't really? I don't know if they've ever really fully explained it.
Not really. Like, I thought in the first season they were gonna go with like the midichlorian slant and like extract that from him, but they never said it.
I think they're trying to clone. They're definitely trying to clone Grogu. But they have yet to really explain this. But basically there's this doctor named Dr. Pershing, and he was the doctor that was like operating on him and stuff. And Mando had spared his life a few times in the season. So basically there's a whole plot that happens in this episode with Dr. Pershing and another former Imperial officer, Officer Kane. And basically they're in this program that basically rehabilitates Imperials who either were captured or came forward and say, I don't want to be involved with the Empire anymore. So Dr. Pershing and Officer Kane are in this program, and basically Dr. Pershing's like still kind of trying to do this cloning stuff, and he doesn't really have any like technology to do that. So Dr. Kane like befriends him, and they had worked together with Moff Gideon and stuff, so they like knew each other. And basically, long story short, Kane kind of builds his trust and kind of ends up selling him out to the people who are like in charge of this program. And basically she ends up like wiping his memory of like anything that happened, and kind of blames it on like, oh, he was like, you know, trying to like go back on his word and kind of thing. So she kind of frames him to look like he was doing something wrong when she was actually doing something wrong. And in this process she ends up getting access to technology from it
was an old destroyer.
An old, Imperial destroyer that has the technology that basically can clone people again. So that's, like, the big plotline that happens in that episode, and basically it's implying and setting up that maybe the officer is going to send this technology to Moff Gideon, because the ship that Moff Gideon was supposed to be transported to this planet to basically go on trial, the ship blew up. And everyone's like, oh, well, Moff Gideon's dead, but then they show at the end of the episode that, like, his ship had been blown up, but he kind of like escaped in the process. So it's kind of implying that Officer Kane is going to send all this information and all this technology to Moff Gideon so he can continue his cloning escapades. So then, going back to Bo-Katan and Din, they go back to the convert.
Yeah, well, initially they get back and they see Bo-Katan and they're like, who is this? You know, it's like, this isn't a Mandalorian.
Because she's not wearing her helmet, and they're all like...
They're very standoffish.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it really took Mando explaining, it's like, hey, she saved my life and all these things and helped me find the actual living waters. They're still there. You know, Mandalore is habitable.
And they prove that the water was like the real water, because he brings her like a vial and the armor puts it in this thing, and she's like, it's real, it's the waters, and they all
so they're like, okay,
yeah.
Yes,
So
Bo-Katan person can't be that bad.
Yeah, so he's like restored, and they basically talk about how she saved him because he fell into the water, and that Bo-Katan had technically bathed in the water, so she is now like restored in the Mandalorian. So they like kind of accept her as their own, because at this point she hasn't removed her helmet, and so she, to them, up until that point, is like a real Mandalorian.
Yeah. At this point too, you know, Mando decides with Grogu, he's like, hey, well, you're not going to be a Jedi, so you're going to be a Mandalorian, so we're going to teach you how to fight the Mandalorian way. And the Mandos had all these, kid Mandos beating each other up in the sand and crazy stuff like that. And Grogu's like, oh my god. And then Mando gives him like this little dart gun that goes on his wrist, and he's like, hey, you're gonna fight this bigger kid. And so the kid starts like shooting him with this little dart gun. It was like paintballs or something like that. It was harmless, but still. And they're like, oh, you gotta shoot him like 3 times to win or something like that. And Grogu's just getting shot up left and right. And he kind of like looks at Mando, and Mando's like, do what you need to do. You gotta win. And then he ends up doing his little crazy Jedi flippy shit. Yeah. And it ends up behind the kid and shoots him and wins. And they're all kind of like, was it cheating? It was weird, but not really.
And
like,
I think
his ability.
Yeah, I think
less
it
of a Jedi
kind
thing.
of sets up the fact that like, and this was shown a little bit in the Book of Boba Fett, but it's kind of showing that Grogu did learn a lot from Luke.
Yeah.
But I think he wanted to be with Din more than he wanted to learn, but he still has retained all of this training that he did with Luke. So it's kind of like he is a Jedi, but he's also trying to become a Mandalorian. So there's this like line between like training as a Mandalorian, but also retaining and keeping true to who he is as a Jedi. Throughout the season, Baby Yoda kind of talks. He doesn't say like real words, but there's this one scene where Din and Bo-Katan are talking, and they both say, this is the way, because that's like the phrase of the Mandalorians. And so they're both like confirming like this is the way. And Baby Yoda starts like saying something, and it's not like really tangible wording, but it does sound like he's saying like this is the way. Like, so he just starts to sort of talk in his own language, and it's very interesting. The armor decides to make, because he defeated this kid in the battle, she decides to make him a little sigil that he can wear on his little Beskar outfit. And during the process of like forging new pieces of armor, the Mandalorians sort of kind of have visions like during this process, and we learn the backstory of Grogu. And so basically during Order 66, which happens in episode 3, is basically when Emperor Palpatine said Order 66 was to kill all the Jedi, basically. So he was on Coruscant, which was like at the time was like the Jedi capital. He was basically being hidden, and a bunch of Jedi were trying to get him out of Coruscant and like save his life, basically. He ends up being rescued by Jedi Beck, and this actor is actually the same actor who played what's
was it Jar Jar?
Jar Jar Binks. It's the same actor who played Jar Jar Binks. But basically he gets rescued by this Jedi, and it's implied that he is taken to Naboo to like basically go off and be like rescued. So we do see a little bit of his background. During this time, Mando and Bo-Katan and a bunch of other Mandalorians go and try to like rescue some kids that were like kidnapped by this like dinosaur creature, basically. And they go and save it, and they let Bo-Katan be like the leader of the mission, and she sort of proves herself to be valuable to them at that time. And then so Bo-Katan tells the armor about her encounter with the Mythosaur, and I find this was really interesting because the armor doesn't necessarily say like you're bullshitting, but she doesn't necessarily say like I believe you or like you're telling the truth. It's very weird. Mm-hmm. Their interactions between the two of them are very odd this entire season.
We thought the armor was going to be shady. Like she was up to something. Well, she kind of was up to something. But it ended up not being bad.
Yeah, she doesn't necessarily like confirm that Bo-Katan saw the Mythosaur. And it's just like, she's like, oh, well, that's interesting. Like, many Mandalorians have visions. And Bo-Katan's like, no, girl, like, I saw the Mythosaur. And she's like, okay, sis.
Like, it'd be weird for one to survive all of this time.
Yeah.
But, like, not saying, oh, it's impossible.
Yeah, and it's just a very odd interaction. And so Bo-Katan's like, I don't know what to believe. So after this, there's a pilot that comes in. There's more backstory to this, but it's not really important. Basically, a pilot shows up and says that Grief Karga's planet is being overrun by the pirates. So the pirates have retaliated and are like basically destroying the planet. And the Mandalorians are like, okay, let's go and help, because Din is like, I want to go help. And then all the other Mandalorians are like, yeah, we'll stick up with him. And basically, Bo-Katan is going to like kind of lead this invasion, and she kind of takes it upon herself to go and find the Mandalorians that she had been with before, and says that like because they need more, like, allies, basically, to go fight the pirates. Like, they don't have enough, like, bandwidth and firepower to, like, go and fight them as is, so they need more Mandalorians. And, is this where... Yes, this is where the armor... She goes to the armor, and she's like, look, I have people that might be able to help. Like, I'm gonna go and get them. Like, Din and I are gonna go get them. And the armorer tells Bo-Katan to take her helmet off in front of her. Which, this is where I thought they were gonna have a fight. Because this was weird.
Yeah.
And they don't really... they explain it, but, like, it was very odd.
It was weird.
And she's like, do you trust me? And Bo-Katan's like, yeah. Which is like, you met her, like...
a couple times.
You only known this lady for, like, a week at this point. And so she tells her to remove her helmet, and she basically tells her that because Bo-Katan was previously following the rules of, like, not wearing your helmet, but now that she was, like, bathed in the waters, she's now sort of, like, in, like, a gray area where she's, like, half this one type of Mandalorian, half the other. So the armorer's like, go and get your people and, like, bring them, and we'll go fight the pirates. So she goes and finds the people that she was with in season 2. They have since sort of, like, lost faith in her. She's not the leader of them anymore. And they're like, well, you don't even have the Darksaber. You're not even, like, the ruler. And Mando basically says that because he was kidnapped by the spider creature.
And she rescued him.
Yeah.
And she fought the spider creature, then she had it now.
So because he lost the Darksaber when he was being attacked by the spider, and then Bo-Katan used the Darksaber to kill the spider and then hence saved Din, she is now technically in possession of the Darksaber. All the other Mandos are like, yeah, that makes sense. And then she's like the leader now, and now she's like the ruler of Mandalore.
Yeah, it's like, Mando, you could have mentioned that like a week ago.
Yeah, so they're all like, okay, fine, we'll accept it, and we'll go and rescue like all the people. So all the Mandalorians team up, go to the planet and kill all the pirates and basically restore the planet. And then that was the planet where they had previously been living. So they decide, like, okay, fine, we'll, like, help rebuild the town again. They didn't help rebuild the town in the first place, but the town has now since been rebuilt, like, 5 times.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, we'll live here again because that's where we lived in the first place. And so this is the episode where we sort of learn that Moff Gideon had escaped from his prison transport. And people are, like, kind of getting wind that he's alive, which is a problem.
Yeah.
So now I want to get into my favorite episode of the entire season. It's kind of what I call a filler episode, where, if you don't know what filler episodes are, it's basically an episode that's, like, not super important to the main plot, but it's very, like, just fluffy and, like, adds extra, like, content, but it's not necessarily important to the main plot line. Yeah. So this episode was, like, totally just not really important at all to the plot, but it's my favorite episode. So in this episode, they go to the planet where Bo-Katan's, like, former, like, people were. I kind of got ahead of ourselves a little bit. But basically, they end up on the planet where the former, like, all of her friends were, and this is the Darksaber and all those rules. This happens at the end of this episode. We're kind of going a little out of order. But before all of that happens, they ended up at that planet because that's where those people were, and they get diverted to, like, the main part of the city. So this all happens, again, before we learn, like, that she's in possession of the Darksaber. But this is, like, my favorite episode because they get diverted to the capital of this weird planet, and it's the leaders of the planet are Jack Black and Lizzo. Yeah. And when we were watching the episode, I was like, oh my god, that's Lizzo.
And I was like, oh my god, that's Jack Black.
So it's just really random. And basically, okay, so if you don't know, Lizzo is, like, obsessed with the Mandalorian. Like, she's dressed up like Baby Yoda for Halloween one time. Like she loves the Mandalorian. And I guess Jon Favreau, who's, like, the creator of Mandalorian, I guess his kids are, like, big fans of her and knew that she was a fan of the show, and they basically were like, hey, Dad, like, we want her on the show and stuff. So Jon Favreau, like, called her and was like, hey, we want you to be on this episode. So it's very funny that she's on the show. It's just kind of cute and stuff, and she gets to hold, like, Baby Yoda. So I bet she was, like, living.
Oh my god, yeah.
I bet she was, like, just living this the whole time. Basically, Jack Black and Lizzo are, like, they're playing characters, so we're just gonna call them by their names. They're the leaders of this planet, and they're basically like, oh, these droids are, like, going haywire and killing people. We need you to... It's basically a side mission that's, like, not important at all to the plot. They basically go and, like, do this whole thing, this secret mission to try to figure out what's going on with the droids. Basically, this one guy was, like, pissed about something, and he like messed with the droids and stuff. It's not important, but it's a really cute episode because it's just like
it's fun.
It's very fun and cute. And then at the end of that, they go and find like the people and the whole thing with the Darksaber, all that, like that all happens after that. But I really like this episode because it's like it's just a kind of mostly filler and not really important at all, but it was just like fun and just sort of goofy.
Weird, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the last two episodes, Officer Kane from that, like, episode, with the doctor, so she's back with Moff Gideon. So it turns out she was bad the whole time. It was kind of obvious. Yeah. So basically, she found out that the Mandalorians are going to take back Mandalore. In one of the other series, basically, it shows Moff Gideon, taking over, like, somehow he like, beats Bo-Katan or whoever and gets a Darksaber, and so he's like, well, I'm technically the ruler of Mandalore because I got the Darksaber back from Bo-Katan, blah, blah, and he's pissed that the Mandalorians are gonna go try to take back the planet because he was planning on restoring Mandalore as his home base kind of thing.
His planet.
Yes, his planet. And they're gonna like ruin all of it. So the Mandalorians are like, okay, we're gonna go take back the planet, and they're not aware of all the Moff Gideon stuff. They have no idea that's going on. So they go to the planet, and then there was some people that had been living there the whole time that were like outlaws, basically, or something. It was very weird.
It was weird, yeah.
Some of the stuff in this season was very, like, it was weird, like the direction that they went.
Yeah, almost like Waterworld vibes, because they had like big sailboats, and they just kind of like zoomed around on the surface. And it was weird, yeah.
So they find these people that have been living there, and they take them to like this area where they can like go in or whatever. And in this process of like finding these people, they kind of realize that the Earth is now viable and crops can grow, and it's kind of setting up that they're gonna, really turn this world back to what it was, and they establish this as their home planet again and take it back from its sort of decay, in a sense.
Yeah.
And so Moff Gideon is also, like, him and all his people are also, like, going to the planet. And they get bound to, like, this area of, like, the caverns or whatever.
The forge.
No, they're trying to go back to the forge so that they can, like, restore it or whatever.
Light it and start making armor.
Because once they get the forge going, they can start making their armor and, like, infrastructure and stuff like that. And so once they get down to the forge, Moff Gideon is there with all of his people, and they start fighting everyone. And one of the characters named Paz Vizsla, who was very prominent on the Clone Wars, and is actually voiced by Jon Favreau. Again, Jon Favreau is the creator of The Mandalorian. He's done a bunch of stuff. He's not played by Jon Favreau. He's played by this, like, giant, buff, like, wrestler dude. Basically, Paz ends up getting killed, which I'm sure all the people who are obsessed with the Clone Wars were, like, shook by that.
Yeah, or mad or something.
Yeah. So he ends up getting killed, but he, like, kind of...
He sacrificed himself.
He sacrificed himself. Yeah. Moff Gideon and all his people are, like, chasing everyone around Mandalore to basically kill them, and to take back the planet. And there's people, like... They only sent, like, a small party of the Mandalorians down to the planet. So there's a bunch of people, like, up in the sky doing, like, aerial attacks, because now more Moff Gideon's people have come into, like, the airspace and are trying to, like, kill them.
So once they're done with the fighting in the forge, the lower areas of Mandalore, Bo-Katan and them, they head back up to the main Mandalorian ship. They're still fighting with, Moff Gideon's forces up there. So there's, like, a huge Mandalorian ship, and then there's the huge ship that's Moff Gideon's ship up there, and, like, they have all their fighters and stuff zooming around and stuff. Mando is still in prison because Moff Gideon managed to separate him, but Grogu was still down there. He was hiding because, of course, he went with Mando, but but he managed to hide while they were having the fights down in the tunnels and whatnot. But so he goes there, he finds Mando, he saves him, and then as they're trying to escape, that's when they run through all these vats, basically filled with Moff Gideon clones in various stages of completion, and they're all Force sensitive, which is what we think. They kind of implied without directly saying it. Yeah. That's why Moff Gideon wanted the technology, the cloning, whatever, from Grogu, so that he could get Grogu's Force powers into his clones. Yeah. Yeah. So again, and I don't fault the show for this because I feel like a lot of Star Wars shit is never actually explained. But yeah, so it's implied that the Force powers of Grogu could be harnessed and put into these clones of Moff Gideon. Yeah. Again, but also not midichlorian, but sort of along those lines.
But also
they're in your blood. But
they never explain why Grogu.
Right.
Because there's other
Force-sensitive
Force-sensitive people out there.
I mean,
that
they could have been hunting down Ahsoka.
They could have been hunting Ahsoka or Luke, or like there's other people. So there has to be something, and obviously I think they're going to get into this in the next season, but there has to be something with Grogu specifically. And like, I don't personally know the physiology of like the Yoda species, but there's only been 3 Yoda species. I don't know, what are they called? I don't know what they're called.
I'm not even
I
sure.
think they have a real name, but we're just gonna call them the Yodas. There's 3 of them. There's Yoda, Baby Yoda, and oh my god, what was her name?
Oh no.
The lady one.
Yeah.
And she was in the prequels.
Yep.
I can't remember what her name is. It was like a female Yoda, and she was like on the Jedi Council, and there's like theories that her and Yoda, you know, did the do, and Baby Yoda is like their kid, but it's never said. But yeah, there has to be something specifically with Baby Yoda and why he was the one that Moff Gideon wanted. Because like, if he can just like harness this, maybe there's something special about them, and maybe it has to do with the fact that they age very slowly.
Oh, maybe.
So I don't know. So I think that's going to come out in the next season, but it's never really explicitly said. So yeah, there's a bunch of like Moff Gideon clones running around. And doesn't Mando like kill a bunch of them?
Yeah, they ended up not running around because he just destroyed them all.
Right.
Which, I mean, obviously pissed Moff Gideon off because there wasn't all this work, all this time.
But I think those weren't all the clones.
Oh,
I think
really?
they
didn't say they were all the clones.
Yeah,
so
I think there's more of them, because we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah. Mando ends up destroying all the clones that at least were located in that area, and of course Moff Gideon is really pissed off, and so he's basically going to have his final stand against Mando and Bo-Katan and Grogu. Like, you want to call him Baby Yoda and Grogu at the same time. And,
Baby Yogu?
Baby Yogu. Oh no, Baby Yoda. Dude. Anyway, they're down in the forge area and they're fighting. But meanwhile, there's still, you know, crazy stuff going on up top and in betwixt the aerial battle and all of that. The leader of the Mando mercenaries, who were Bo-Katan's buddies, who then left her, then who joined her again after she got the Darksaber back. The leader of those folks, he takes one of the flagships, like the really big ones, and he's like, you know, the only way we're really going to destroy all these guys down here is by like ramming our ship into this one and taking out all their fighters and stuff like that. So he's basically sacrificing himself to take out Moff Gideon's ship and all the associated fighters that were on that. He does, and also he just rides the ship all the way down into the forge. You know, he assumed that they were all gone. Of course, they're still having the fight down there between Moff and Bo-Katan and Mando and Grogu. So, you know, this huge blast, you know, comes up from the forge from, you know, the ship ramming into the ground, and it ends up toasting Moff Gideon.
So we assume.
We think. So we hope. My God, he's been around too long. But as the blast goes to take them over, Grogu uses his force abilities to create like a force field circle
and save them
around him and Mando and Bo-Katan.
Yeah, and I think that version of Moff Gideon is dead. I believe that Moff Gideon was the original Moff Gideon with no powers. Like, that was like Moff Gideon. But I think there's going to be other clones, because I just don't believe that all of them were taken out that easily, and all of them were even there. Because in the second season, when they go to the ship to rescue Grogu in the first place, there's other, like, clone things in there, and I think that was implying the clones that we saw in this episode, but I just don't buy that those were, like, that was it. Like, I just don't think that was it. A lot of the Mandalorians, like, stay on the planet to kind of restore it and everything, and get rid of the rest of the pirates, and then a lot of them end up going back to Navarro, which is, like, the planet where they were on before. And in the first couple episodes, Grief Karga told Mando, was like, why don't you just retire and live here, and you can just, like, live out your days and stuff. And he's like, I don't want to do that. So at the end, they show Mando sitting outside the porch of, like, a house in Navarro, and Baby Yoda's, like, playing with the Force outside. So that's where it ends. But I really liked this season. I think it showed a lot that we've been waiting for, but I also think it left a lot open, because the Moff Gideon thing, that he's not dead. I don't believe it. And then the armorer, they were setting it up the whole time. They were setting her up
to be shady.
Yeah, they were just setting her up to be like
a shady bitch.
Like, really shady.
Like, what is
and
going on?
The fact that she, like, forced Bo-Katan to take her helmet off was very odd. And then, like, the fact that she didn't believe her about the mythosaur, but she kind of did. It was just very cryptic. She's a very cryptic person.
And she was even doing that with, like, Mando and
Yeah.
some other Mandalorians. She was kind of like...
Figure it out on your own. I have the answers, but you can go find it yourself.
Yeah, and it's like, I get the slant, like, during the whole time we knew that she wanted basically a lot of Mandos, which I think is one of the reasons she was more open to Bo-Katan becoming, you know, their version of Mando after the Living Waters thing, and using that to kind of get the other Mandalorians to agree with her. Whereas in the past, I mean, Mando, he took his helmet off under extenuating circumstances, you could argue, and she was like, "Nah, get out." But now that it's like, oh, the planet does exist. Oh, it's habitable. Oh, it'd be easier to take if we have a lot of Mandalorians on our side. I'm going to let people into the Mandalorian fold who I otherwise may not have. And then she knew Bo-Katan had her little, like, groupies.
Yeah.
And so she was, like, emphasizing to Bo-Katan, it's like, hey, you got Mandalorians too. We can combine our forces, hint, hint, and be like one big Mando force and go retake Mandalore. We're all just Mandalorians, right? We all just want the same thing.
Yeah, and it just seemed like so against what she believed in, and it just seemed like...
It was very much, you know, for her own gain, which they all did get the planet back, I guess, and they ended up winning, so it was good for everyone. But it was still kind of like, you didn't have to be so weird about it.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely going to be more with the planet, like, and like, are they going to do the next season where it's been a couple years in the future where the Mandalorians have sort of reestablished their planet, or are we going to see that? Or is it just going to be like 5 years later and everything's great, and then shit with, you know, maybe Mando and Baby Yoda are just like chilling on the planet and something happens. Like, I'm kind of interested to see like what the timeline is going to be.
That would be cool.
Because like, how much can they really show of them restoring Mandalore? It's like there's not really like, you
right.
can't,
I think they might start to try and tie in. Well, they're definitely had some characters and nods to Rebels. Like Zeb was in the one episode.
Oh, right.
And then we know in the future series coming up, like the Ahsoka show and all that, they're going to be very Rebels heavy. I almost wonder if like they're kind of gonna tie in that. And remember in one of the later episodes, Moff Gideon, he like hologrammed himself into the... It wasn't the Shadow Council, was it? It was some sneaky Imperial officer council. Yeah, where he and like a bunch of still loyal to the Empire generals and admirals and them are obviously up to something. So they might tie the progression of that into the next series. Maybe hint at some things in the new series of movies that happen, like... Oh, yeah. Like, maybe these guys are planting the seeds for, like, the First Order or something like that.
Oh, true.
You know, because obviously, you know, the Empire still exists. So maybe, like, Mando will get tied up into some stuff like that. And...
I would like to rewatch this season. Because I've seen the other seasons, like, a million times, but I only watched this once. Because after just watching it once, I didn't like it as much as I liked the other two seasons. I didn't hate it, and I think I'll like it more as I rewatch it. But I just... liked the other two seasons a little bit better, but I think after we watch it another million times, I'll probably change my mind on it. Yeah. But again, it was a really, really good season. You know, it wasn't like, at the time, it's not my favorite season. I think I like season 2. I don't know. Season 2 was just like really... Anyway, because I like Ahsoka Tano, and I like that they introduced Bo-Katan and all that stuff. So, but it was a really good season. I'm really excited to see like where they go from here, if they're going to tie any of this into the new movies, because cool. They did just announce 3 new Star Wars movies, and one will have Rey, or are they going to tie Bo-Katan and Din into maybe the Ahsoka Tano show that's coming out? So I don't know, like maybe we'll have some cross over in there. And I think the Ahsoka Tano show is supposed to take place after the episode that she appeared on with the Mandalorian.
She's older, so that makes sense.
So I think that the Mandalorian, the episode with Ahsoka, I think the show is going to be after the events of that episode. So
they might be kind of setting up the Ahsoka show to almost be kind of like the Book of Boba Fett, which was, you know, some people call it Mandalorian season 2.5.
Yeah.
Because about the second half of Boba Fett, once they showed the episodes of Grogu and Luke training, Mando played a huge part in the Book of Boba Fett. So I almost wonder if they're going to kind of set Ahsoka up, like, here's, you know, Mandalorian seasons, and here's Ahsoka, then they're going to kind of, like,
intertwine
link them.
Yeah,
where they're going to start, like, introducing some story beats or something. Or...
Because a lot of people didn't watch the Book of Boba Fett. A lot of people thought that show was garbage, and I loved Book of Boba Fett. It wasn't the greatest show in the entire universe, but I did like it. But a lot of people didn't even bother to watch it. So when Grogu just, like, randomly showed up on the first episode, they're like, what is happening? And then people were like, why do I have to watch other shows so that I know what's going on in this show? And I'm like, it's kind of like Marvel, where it's like, if you don't watch all the movies, you're not going to know what's going on. So, like, yeah, I do agree. It's like, maybe we shouldn't have done that outside of The Mandalorian, but it's all a universe. You can't just watch Thor Ragnarok, not watch Endgame and Infinity War, and then watch the next Thor and be like, where's Loki?
Yeah.
Why isn't he alive? Oh, they're talking about how he's dead? That doesn't make any sense. It's like, you have to watch the subsequent content. It's not just a Star Wars thing.
Yeah, and it's not like it's not like we didn't already know who Boba Fett was either. Yeah. It's not like it was a weird surprise to maybe they're going to tie this into Book of Boba Fett, because Boba Fett himself was in season 2 of The Mandalorian and played a prominent part. So it's not like, oh, here's just this random show about Boba Fett and we've never seen him again and he's never tied in. He was already tied in.
Yeah. So I think it's just the matter of people, like, not wanting to, in my opinion, do their homework.
You can also just read a summary online of the episodes that are applicable.
Yeah. So I think it's just a lot of people are like, I don't want to watch extra content. It's like, it's not just with Star Wars. Like, it's in general. Like, if you're going to watch something within a universe, you need to understand all of it. That's why, like, some of the characters that you mentioned that were on Rebels, I don't know who they are, but I'm not going to complain that they're showing up on the show. You know? Or if I'm missing certain information that they talked about in the Rebels, I'm not going to be like, oh, I didn't get it on Ahsoka because I didn't watch Rebels. Like, I just don't get it. And I'll look it up. Like, it's not really that hard.
Yeah, or what was the, oh my gosh, the meme from Obi-Wan talking to Luke in the original series? It's like, oh, during my time back in the Clone Wars, and the meme is like, the lady like, the what?
Yeah, it's like people don't even know what it is.
There's so much content. It's like...
Yeah, people just complain because they can. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed learning about The Mandalorian and hearing a bit more about The Mandalorian Season 3 and our opinions. You can find us basically anywhere podcasts are found. And as always, stay safe, stay classy, and I'll chat again with you soon. Goodbye!
See ya.